Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. No, wait a minute, that's not right. Take two. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, or depending on what time you are watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. Yes, it's been a minute, so I almost forgot what my intro was. But I am back, trying to do some more stuff now that it's summertime. I'm excited to be here. I hope you're excited to be joining me on this fun, thrilling ride that is the movies. And on this topic of movies, I am talking about a new independent, well, I don't know if I call it independent. It's from our friends at IFC and Shudder, a new horror movie that just came out called In a Violent Nature. This is my third Shudder movie that I saw in theaters this year. One of the highlights of my theater going experience was Late Night with the Devil, which was absolutely incredible. If you have the chance to check it out, I do believe it's streaming on AMC Plus now. The other movie was called Stop Motion. Shudder has this, I don't know what to kind of compare them to. The only thing I could really think of is A24, and I don't want to call them the poor man's A24 because there's nothing about their movies that make it seem like they're like a poorer version. They're really, really solid, very well done. It seems like they give their creators a lot of independence. Now, I don't know if this is the case where a lot of these movies were produced independently and then AMC, Shudder came in later and picked them up, but it seems like a lot of their movies are just unique. Even when I was watching the trailers before, I saw some trailers for some movies that I was like, okay, I'm into that. There was one that was Russell Crowe, surprisingly doing like an indie horror movie. And for some reason, I thought this was a sequel to the movie he did like a couple years back where he played the Exorcist. I think it was called The Pope's Exorcist. But I don't think that's a sequel. I do think it's a different movie. But this movie was called The Exorcism. And I'm not really into those kind of movies, but for some reason, this trailer, I was like, okay, I'm into it. And then we had another one for this movie called Oddity, which I was like, all right, this looks really weird, really interesting. And when I saw the filmmaker, it was Damian McCarthy. He did this short film called He Dies at the End, which was one of my favorite horror shorts I've ever seen. If you have the chance to check it out, go on YouTube. He Dies at the End. It's black and white. It's 4 minutes long. Highly recommend. Anyways, getting back to In a Violent Nature, which is now the third Shudder horror movie I saw in theaters, which is another cool thing. You know, AMC Plus, they are mostly television streaming now. So for them to put these movies in theaters, just give them a chance. It's cool. Do they do well? Not really. I went and saw this movie and there was maybe 6 or 7 other people in the theater. This would be a type of movie that would be a great midnight screening. Here we go. Let's get started into the story. I do want to forewarn, if you have not seen In a Violent Nature, definitely spoilers ahead. I will be talking heavily about the plot. So this movie starts and it's already a little bit different. And from what my context was from the trailer and from kind of reading about it, it's about a serial killer who looks like he kind of came back from the dead. Of course, the comparisons that I'm going to give, and probably a lot of other people are going to talk about, Friday the 13th, Jason Voorhees, because he's kind of this big brute killer, looks kind of like a zombified from the later versions of Jason. So of course, yes, I'm going to go to Friday the 13th. And this movie, in general, it's a campfire. It's done, in the woods. Kids are camping. So of course, you're going to think of a Friday the 13th movie. That's what those premises were essentially set up on. Either it was summer camp or people camping. If you change this title and just call it Friday the 13th, change the main character's name from Johnny to Jason. Yeah, they did a Friday the 13th remake and this is how it was done. I would have really been down for that. They do certain things that basically are Friday the 13th level. Like I said, you have the campers, you have this brute force killer. You easily could have changed his fireman mask or whatever he wears in the movie to a hockey mask if you wanted to. His whole motivation is this necklace that gets taken from his gravesite. They talk about it was his mother's necklace, so of course that could have just been Mrs. Voorhees. But that is where the movie starts off. We see this kind of gravesite. We hear these characters talking off screen. We don't see them, which is kind of the point, because this movie, for the first 75 minutes, is from the killer's perspective. So I thought that was a really creative choice. I thought that was really different. I really like that aesthetic. So yes, we can hear these kind of college age, 20-ish year olds talking off screen about this campfire story, about this killer from like 70 years ago and his mother and things like that. The only thing we see on screen is this necklace dangling, and then we finally see a hand grab that necklace, and then this is what brings the killer back to life. It's a pretty general storyline. It's nothing that's going to be too deep. I don't think it was meant to be that deep. It's pretty baseline. It's okay. He's a killer, came back from the dead. His motivation is getting his mom's necklace. And you know what? That worked for me. I didn't need anything more than that. So we see him basically walking around. It really is as if we are following him. The camera literally is behind him most of the time. A lot of steady cam shots as he's walking. It almost reminded me of like a video game where you're the controller and you're walking behind and you're watching your character as he just walks around. And the first kill we get in the movie is pretty much done off screen. And that made me think, okay, is most of the violence in this movie going to be off screen and you're just going to see the grisly after effects of everything? You do see the after effects of this first kill, and it's pretty grisly. You can see that this victim's face was like kind of destroyed and body limbs are all over the place. So I was like, okay, is this going to be this type of horror movie where we see off the screen violence? And the answer is no, because we finally get introduced to our, I guess you can call them the teen or college kids. There's about 7 of them and they're sitting around the campfire, and there's the one that's telling the story of this boy who was killed named Johnny, and then all these mysterious things happened. We're pretty much never shown their point of view until the end of the movie, which I'll get to because that worked for me really well. But we get our first death of these characters. This was the filmmaker saying, hey, remember when I had my first kill was on screen and you maybe thought that was going to be the case? Hell no, because this guy who's the one that tells the campfire story is the first to get killed of these campers, and it's pretty graphic. We see Johnny, the stand-in Jason Voorhees killer, I forgot what the weapon was, but he basically is up against a tree and he cuts the pretty much mouth to top of his head part off. You see that head just kind of like fall off. So at that point, you're kind of on board saying, okay, no, we're going to see on-screen violence moving forward. Cool. I mean, it's a horror movie. That's probably what you signed up for. The movie's called In a Violent Nature. You're going to want to see some on-screen violence, right? So at this point, it pretty much is, all right, next character to get killed, next character to get killed. They are still done in some pretty creative ways. We see these 2 girls swimming at a lake. We see Johnny the killer go into the water from the other end of the lake, and then it pretty much holds on that for a while, and then you finally see the girl just go under the water, and that one's not violent. So it's like, okay, so maybe, again, teasing the idea of like, maybe you're only going to get that one violent scene. But then we go on to the next girl who's doing her yoga or whatever, and I must say, if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. When I saw this on screen, I said to myself, wow, I've never seen a kill like that in a movie before. That's the kind of death on screen that if you're watching this a midnight movie, people are definitely hooting and hollering, because I was, wow. Holy smokes. He basically puts a hole in her body by just punching her because that's how strong he is. Then he takes this like hook chain thing and essentially yanks her head into her body and then out her back. So once again, it's like this back and forth of these deaths that's going to be like, okay, it's going to be sort of insinuated or not fully shown. And then we kind of get to the point where, all right, these characters are getting killed off. We're down to essentially our final girl. This is where the movie changes up a little bit. And this is where it really worked for me structure-wise. So the first 75-ish minutes of the movie, we are following this killer. We are specifically with him the whole time. But then we're basically, for the last 10 to 15 minutes, once it's just the final girl, and that's her, she's the last one left, she pretty much runs off into the woods. She realizes like there's nothing I can do. She's the one that has the necklace. She puts it down. She backs away and is like, forget it. By the time we're down to these last 2 characters, they try to set a trap. It clearly doesn't work. The killer Johnny just absolutely destroys the remaining male victim at that point. And he is just going ham on this guy. Like, he is destroying him in a violent nature. He said it! He said it! If that were me, if I had just seen my friends getting killed, fight or flight, I would 100% flight. But I get what they were trying to do because this blood is on their hands. They have to try something. They're trying to make sure that nobody else gets killed. But then at this point, this girl realizes there's nothing I can do. She puts the necklace down and she backs away. And we pretty much at that point are following her now. And this is where it worked for me so much. This last 10-15 minutes gave me so much anxiety because we got comfortable with the idea that we are with this killer for 75 minutes. And now all of a sudden, we're not with him anymore and we don't know where he is. And that type of idea, which a lot of slasher movies back in the day, that's where that sort of horror came from. Is like Michael Myers could be anywhere, Jason could be anywhere, and now in this movie, again, for the majority of the movie, that's not the case. You're with this killer. They change it up a little bit, but for the last 10-15 minutes, you don't know where this guy is. And I was on the edge of my seat because I'm like, could he pop out at any minute? You know, we don't know this final girl. We never really got to know her character, so we don't know if she's safe or not. I kept going back and forth in my head like, oh, she's gonna get out, and then I was like, no, I don't know, because there were scenes that just kind of kept going. She finally gets picked up by this woman, this older woman, gives her a ride. You know, they're stopped on the side of the road. I'm just like, go, 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 like, please just go. Realistically, she ran for a long time. This guy just walks, so logistically, there's a good chance he would not have come close to even finding her. But again, it's a horror movie. You just never know how these characters can just pop out of nowhere. In the back of my head, I'm just like, oh my God, is he in the back seat? Is he in the bed of the pickup truck? This woman's talking to her, and this conversation goes on for a while. And I'm like, man, this movie could have just ended and she got away, but it just kind of keeps going, and that makes you think, ooh, is there going to be something more? Like, is this girl not safe? And then the woman that picked her up eventually has to stop the car because the girl's bleeding from her leg. She has to stop the bleeding. And in my head, I'm just like, oh my God, no, just don't stop the car. Just keep driving. That's the safest you can be. And finally, the car stops. She's trying to help her. And I'm like, oh my God, he's gonna pop out. Something's gonna happen. And to the credit of the filmmaker, that never happens. That could have been the easy studio note jump scare at the end, that the killer just pops out at the end, cut to black. You know, you get that little jump scare of, okay, you got me, but ultimately when you're processing this, you'd be like, yeah, that was pretty cheap. And that never happens. We kind of focus on the girl. She's looking out in the woods. And then the final shot, we just see the canister that she put the necklace down on. The necklace is gone, and that's it. So for the last 10 to 15 minutes, after we've been following this killer the whole time, we do not see him at all for the last 10 to 15 minutes. And this completely worked structure-wise for me because I was on the edge of my seat having like a panic attack. And for that, I really consider this one of my favorite movies so far this year. I loved Late Night for the Devil. This is up there with that. I don't think we've had a ton of great horror movies this year. There's been some decent ones. This would be a movie I would definitely rewatch. And I guess once you've seen the movie for the first time, you won't have that anxiety anymore moving forward. But my God, watching this for a first time, whew. So that is my take on In a Violent Nature. Well, it's a nice day out here, so I'm going to go take a leisurely walk in the woods. And if I happen to stumble upon any necklaces, I probably won't fuck with it.